Welcome to my YouTube channel. Please request subscribe my channel. The laughter started before she even reached the center of the room. It wasn't loud at first. Just a few snickers, the kind young men think they can hide behind clenched jaws and lowered heads. But in a place like this, nothing stayed hidden for long. Not weakness, not arrogance, and certainly not disrespect. The U.S. SEAL training room was designed to break people. Concrete walls, cold lighting, no windows. The air smelled faintly of sweat, metal, and something older, like discipline soaked into the structure itself. Every man inside that room had fought to be there. Months of exhaustion, humiliation, and pain had carved the word elite into their bones. And then she walked in. She was small, not fragile but compact, like someone who had learned long ago how to take up less space without ever being invisible. Her hair was gray, pulled back tight. Her posture was straight, not forced, not proud, just natural, like gravity had no argument with her spine. She wore no uniform. That alone felt wrong. A few trainees exchanged glances. Someone near the back leaned over and whispered something. Another smirked. One of them let out a soft laugh, sharp and careless. An old woman? Here? In this room? This was where lungs burned and egos died. Where instructors crushed confidence just to see who could rebuild it under pressure. This was not a place for sentiment. And definitely not a place for her. She stopped near the center of the room. The laughter grew slightly bolder. No one told her where to stand. No one guided her. She didn't seem to need it. At the front, the lead instructor didn't speak. He didn't correct the trainees. He didn't even look at them. His eyes were fixed on her, unreadable, sharp, and alert in a way that made the air feel heavier. That should have been the first warning. But youth rarely recognizes warnings until it's too late. One trainee, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind who excelled physically and knew it, folded his arms and tilted his head. His grin wasn't cruel, just confident. Too confident. "She lost," he muttered. A few chuckles followed. The woman heard them. She didn't react. That unsettled something deep in the room, though most of the trainees didn't realize it yet. People unused to power often think silence means weakness. They don't understand that some people stay quiet because they don't need to prove anything. She placed her hands behind her back and waited. The seconds stretched. Finally, the instructor spoke. "Today," he said, voice flat and controlled, "we have a guest." That word guest felt wrong too. The instructor paused, as if choosing each word with care. "She's here to observe." Observe what? A few trainees shifted uncomfortably. The tall one raised his hand halfway, then lowered it, then raised it again with a smirk that suggested he already knew the answer to whatever question he was about to ask. "Sir," he said, respectfully. "What exactly is she observing?" The instructor turned slowly. His gaze locked onto the trainee, not angry, not annoyed, just measuring. "She'll tell you," he said, and then he looked back at the woman. All eyes followed. For the first time, the room truly focused on her. She stepped forward one pace. The laughter had stopped now, not because anyone had ordered it to stop, but because something in her presence quietly demanded attention. Her eyes moved across the room, not scanning, not judging, remembering, as if she'd been here before. As if this place belonged to her long before it belonged to them. "I was asked to come," she said. Her voice was calm, not weak, not loud, just steady. "I was told this class was exceptional." That word landed differently than expected. A few trainees straightened. Pride flared. She nodded slowly, as if acknowledging something unseen. "You laugh," she continued, looking directly at the tall trainee. "Because you don't recognize me." The trainee opened his mouth, then closed it. The room was completely silent now. "That's fair," she said. "Most don't." She took another step forward. "I won't take much of your time." The instructor shifted slightly, just slightly, but enough. That movement didn't go unnoticed by the trainees who were paying attention. The best ones always noticed the small things. "I was asked one question before I came here," the woman continued. "They asked me what name I wanted them to use." She paused. "My rank hasn't been active for a long time. A flicker of confusion rippled through the room. Rank? I told them rank wouldn't matter, she said. Not anymore. She clasped her hands together, fingers weathered, knuckles marked by time. So they asked me for my call sign. That word hit differently. Call sign. Every trainee knew the weight of that term. It wasn't a nickname. It was something earned. Something carried. Something that followed you into places you didn't talk about. A few faces hardened. Smirks faded. The tall trainee swallowed. The woman looked at him again. Not unkindly, just directly. You thought I didn't belong here, she said softly. He didn't answer. That's fair too, she added. I thought the same thing once. About someone else. Her eyes drifted, just for a moment, as if touching a memory far older than the room. I was wrong, she said. The instructor finally spoke again. Whenever you're ready, he said. The woman nodded, but she didn't speak her call sign yet. Instead, she looked around the room one last time, at the young faces, the confident shoulders, the unscarred eyes. You're being trained to survive, she said, to adapt, to overcome. She smiled faintly. No one ever trains you for what comes after. The silence thickened. Somewhere in the room, a trainee felt his heartbeat slow. Another felt it speed up. They didn't know why. Not yet. And then she took a breath. And the room leaned forward without realizing it. The room held its collective breath. Even the instructors seemed to lean back slightly, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of what was about to happen settle. The trainees, so accustomed to control, to the illusion of power over every situation, felt something unfamiliar, uncertainty. A chill crawled along their spines that had nothing to do with the air conditioning or the concrete walls. She began to walk slowly among them, each step measured, deliberate. Not a single trainee moved from their spot. The ones in the back strained to see her more clearly, trying to read the woman as if her expression were a manual of her past achievements. But her face revealed nothing that could be read. Lines and wrinkles told of age, yes, but her eyes, those piercing, calm, steady eyes, hinted at battles fought long ago, battles that had left no scars visible to the untrained eye. You think this is just a training room, she said quietly, so that only a few heard at first, then gradually louder. That strength is measured in how fast you swim, how much you lift, how far you can push your body before it breaks. A few trainees shifted, uncomfortable. They had been drilled endlessly in physical endurance, mental fortitude, and tactical precision. And yet, here was someone, small in stature, speaking as if she had been inside their heads for years. But you are wrong, she continued, her voice calm, precise. Strength is not in endurance alone. Strength is in history, in the choices that follow fear, in the moments when no one else is watching, when the world forgets what you have done. That is where true power lives. A quiet murmur passed among the trainees. Not a laugh, but a recognition of something they didn't yet understand. The woman stopped in the center of the room again. She clasped her hands behind her back and looked at the young men with a gaze that pierced through bravado and ego alike. You have been trained to mock, to challenge authority, to doubt those who came before you. That is natural, she said. It is what the world expects of the young, the untested, the unscarred. But some of us have walked paths you cannot imagine. Paths that demand silence, and yet demand respect. A trainee's eyes flicked to the instructors. One of them, normally unshakable, gave a subtle nod, a gesture that was almost imperceptible but that sent a ripple through the room. Something had changed. The woman had claimed a space in that room without force, without demanding it. Her presence alone had altered the atmosphere, like a tide pulling on unseen currents beneath the surface. She paused, then whispered almost to herself, "They will laugh again if they can. They always do. But the truth has a way of catching up." One of the braver trainees, naive enough to believe confidence could overcome experience, stepped forward slightly, as if preparing to speak. The room tensed. He opened his mouth to make a remark, a joke, maybe even a challenge. Before he could utter a single word, the woman lifted her hand. Not aggressively, not in anger, but in that subtle, commanding way that left no room for interruption. The air in the room seemed to solidify around her hand, the silence pressing in on every trainee until it became almost physical. "Do you wish to hear my call sign?" she asked, her voice calm, deliberate. The tall trainee swallowed hard. His throat felt suddenly dry. He realized he didn't know what to expect, but he felt instinctively that whatever came next would not be ordinary. "Yes," the instructor said softly, almost to himself. "You may speak." She inhaled once. Her chest rose slowly, deliberately. The entire room, now holding its breath in unison, leaned forward without thinking. Even the windows seemed to shrink, the walls closer, the space tighter. The weight of history, of things unspoken, pressed down on every young man inside. "I am Phoenix One," she said, her voice steady, resolute, unflinching. It was as if someone had turned off every sound in the world. The laughter, the movement, the chatter, they all evaporated. For the first time, every single person in the room realized that this was not just a call sign. This was a legacy, a history that demanded recognition, not because it sought it, but because it had earned it. The room stayed silent. The trainees, the ones who had mocked, the ones who had thought themselves untouchable, felt their confidence drain. Their bravado crumbled under the weight of unspoken wars, sacrifices, and achievements they couldn't yet comprehend. The instructors, normally cold and measured, allowed themselves a brief glance at one another. One nodded slightly, as if confirming something long remembered but rarely spoken aloud. Respect had entered the room quietly, without fanfare, and now it lingered palpable in every corner. The tall trainee's hands trembled slightly. He had thought he understood strength. He had thought he knew courage. And yet, here was a woman, older than his mother, speaking a name that carried decades of battles, victories, and sacrifices, without ever raising a weapon, without ever threatening anyone. And in that moment, every mockery he had offered, every laugh he had risked, vanished into silence. The woman's eyes scanned the room once more, not with pride, not with arrogance, but with the quiet assurance of someone who had walked through fire and emerged without a single doubt in her purpose. "You will remember this," she said softly, "not because I demanded it, but because it will find you later when you need it most." Her words didn't feel like advice. They were a subtle imprint on the minds of those who thought they could mock, a lesson they would carry for the rest of their lives. Then she turned. The room remained frozen, every trainee aware of the unspoken rules of history and respect. As she walked to the exit, each step deliberate and controlled, the silence stretched, heavy, reverent. When the door closed behind her, it was as if the air had been altered, not just because of what she said, but because of what she was, a figure from history, present in flesh and voice, leaving an indelible mark on those who had been foolish enough to doubt. The tall trainee exhaled without realizing it. His chest felt lighter yet heavier at the same time. He had been tested in ways he didn't yet understand, and he knew, instinctively, that this moment would shape him forever. The room, now empty of her presence, felt different, smaller, quieter, filled with something invisible but undeniable: respect. Long before this room existed, before the concrete walls and the drills and the endless physical tests, she had earned her place in ways that no training manual could teach. Her story was not whispered in public ceremonies, nor written in official records. It existed in fleeting glances, in letters sent home but never published, in scars that were invisible to the eye but indelibly etched into the soul. She had joined the special forces at a time when few believed women could, or should, participate in such operations. At the outset, she was underestimated, dismissed, and often outright mocked. They called her a novice, a distraction, a guest in a man's world. But she had something they did not: an unshakable calm, a precision that came from observing, learning, and calculating. Every step, every breath, every decision was measured. Her first mission had been in the most unforgiving terrain imaginable: dense forests, unforgiving mountains, and enemy forces trained to detect and destroy the slightest weakness. While her comrades relied on brute force, She relied on strategy, stealth, and instinct honed by years of meticulous preparation. Where others hesitated, she moved with deliberate certainty, turning near-certain danger into opportunity. The mission changed her. It left marks that could never be erased, but it also forged a quiet authority. She learned the price of mistakes, of impulsive bravery, of thinking that youth and strength alone could protect anyone. She watched friends fall, heroes whose names would never be remembered outside their small unit, and understood that legacy was often silent, uncelebrated, yet infinitely powerful. Years later, in operations that spanned oceans and continents, she became a figure both feared and respected by allies and adversaries alike. Her call sign, Phoenix One, was given not for a rank, nor for recognition, but because of one defining act. When everything seemed lost, she had risen from impossible circumstances to complete the mission against all odds. Lives were saved, objectives achieved, and history quietly shifted because of her courage and skill. Those who had heard the name before knew instantly the weight it carried. But the trainees in the SEAL room had no context yet. They only knew that an old woman had walked in, and somehow, without raising a weapon or boasting of victories, she had silenced the room. That silence was earned not through intimidation, but through the invisible aura of accomplishment that hung around her like a shadow. Her presence was a reminder that history often hides in the background, quietly shaping the present. She had faced fear that no classroom could replicate, decisions that no drill could simulate, and responsibilities that would crush ordinary minds. And now, in this room, decades later, the echoes of that life pressed down on every young man who had laughed too soon. As she had predicted, the lessons began to settle. Some trainees felt shame, a subtle, creeping awareness that their bravado had been misplaced. Others felt awe, a strange combination of fear and admiration. And the best among them, the ones who truly listened, felt something deeper. A spark of inspiration, a recognition that greatness was often silent, unassuming, and yet undeniable. The instructors, though trained to remain impartial, allowed themselves small nods and subtle gestures. They had seen her before, perhaps briefly, perhaps in whispered accounts, and understood that her visit was more than ceremonial. It was a test of perspective, a challenge to the arrogance that so often accompanies youth. The room had been broken not by physical force, but by the sheer weight of history, legacy, and earned respect. She did not lecture. She did not demand attention. She merely existed in that space, and her existence carried a story so potent that it could not be ignored. Her call sign, Phoenix One, was more than a name. It was a declaration that survival, courage, and triumph are often quiet, unseen, and known only to those who have truly lived them. The tall trainee, the one who had smirked and mocked earlier, felt his hands curl into fists, not out of aggression, but out of awe. He understood now, instinctively, that he had been standing in the presence of someone who had redefined the boundaries of what it meant to endure, to fight, and to overcome. And then, she shared one final truth, softly, almost a whisper, so that only the closest trainees could hear. Remember this. It is not enough to survive challenges. You must survive the history that follows you, the legacy that shadows your every choice, and the silence of those who came before. That is the real battlefield. Even the air seemed to shift at her words. It was as if decades of untold stories, of heroism and sacrifice, had been compressed into a single moment. The laughter, the brash confidence, the petty rivalries. All of it seemed trivial now. The trainees began to understand. Respect was not commanded. It was earned, silently, over years, through choices most could not imagine making. And some of the most powerful forces in the world moved quietly, without fanfare, and yet changed everything. By the time she reached the center of the room again, her figure seemed larger somehow. Not because she had grown, but because her story had filled the space. The room, once filled with youthful arrogance, now carried reverence, tension, and reflection. Phoenix One did not raise her voice. She did not boast of medals, campaigns, or awards. She simply stood, waited, and let the weight of her presence teach the lesson that no drill, no training exercise, and no textbook could ever convey. Her final step, before speaking the call sign that would leave the room in awe, carried the weight of history itself. Every trainee, every instructor, every eye in the room followed her. They waited. They knew that what came next would be more than words. It would be an imprint on their understanding of courage, honor, and legacy. And then she spoke. The room felt smaller now, tighter, as though it had contracted to contain the weight of what was about to happen. Every trainee leaned forward without thinking, every eye fixed on her, every nerve taut with anticipation. The instructors stood silent, barely breathing, fully aware that this moment would remain in the memory of every person present for a lifetime. She paused in the center of the room, just a few steps away from the front row. Her posture remained calm, steady, unshakable, yet the tension was palpable. It was a strange mix. Authority without aggression, power without display, and history without fanfare. She inhaled slowly, almost ceremoniously, and then exhaled with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced the unimaginable and survived. "Phoenix won," she said. The words were simple, concise, yet they carried the resonance of decades of experience, triumphs, failures, and sacrifice. They were more than just a call sign. They were a declaration, a legacy, a history condensed into 2 syllables. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a cough, not a shuffle of feet, not even a breath seemed to escape. Every trainee felt it deep in their chest, a sudden awareness that the life they had known in this room, the brash laughter, the mocking, the sense of invulnerability, was now fragile. Some felt shame, some felt awe, some felt an almost unbearable weight of humility. The tall trainee who had smirked moments ago had his hands trembling slightly. His confidence had evaporated, replaced by a profound understanding that courage and experience are often silent forces, felt only when they arrive fully realized. The instructors, normally detached and unemotional, exchanged subtle glances. A nod here, a slight tilt of the head there, as though acknowledging the unspoken truth of her presence. Phoenix One had arrived not to teach them tactics, not to lecture them on protocol, but to impart a lesson in history, respect, and the quiet power of experience. She did not linger in triumph. She did not smile, though there was a faint glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. Instead, she stepped back, letting the room absorb her presence, the meaning of her call sign, and the depth of the legacy it represented. "Remember this," she said softly, so that each trainee could feel the weight of her words. "True strength is earned in silence, courage is tested in unseen battles, and respect is given only when it is deserved. Do not forget those who came before, nor the sacrifices that made your training possible." Her voice lingered in the air, and even as she moved toward the exit, every eye followed her. Not with fear, but with recognition. Not with resentment, but with awe. The energy in the room had shifted completely. It had transformed from arrogance and youthful bravado into understanding, humility, and a newfound drive to live up to the legacy she represented. When the door closed behind her, the sound was almost ceremonial. The echo of her presence remained, heavy and instructive, like a silent teacher who had imparted the most important lesson of all. The trainees, now quiet and introspective, sat frozen for a moment, each one processing the full impact of what they had witnessed. Time seemed to stretch. The tall trainee exhaled slowly, feeling both smaller and larger at the same time. Smaller because he had been humbled, larger because he had glimpsed what true strength could look like. Others felt a stirring deep within, a spark that would ignite a lifelong commitment to excellence, honor, and respect. The instructors finally broke the silence, their voices calm but firm. "Class dismissed," one said, but there was no laughter or chatter as the trainees rose. The room had been transformed. What had been a typical day of training was now a turning point, a moment etched into memory, carried silently forward in every decision they would make from that day onward. Outside, the world remained unchanged, unaware that inside a small concrete room, something extraordinary had occurred. The old woman, Phoenix One, walked down the corridor without ceremony, without attention, as if she had simply completed a duty that mattered far more than recognition. The impact of her presence would resonate far beyond the room. It would shape the minds of the trainees, influence the culture of the instructors, and become a story whispered among those who had witnessed it. A quiet legend that reminded everyone that greatness often arrives without warning, and history favors the silent, the prepared, and the courageous. And in that silence, in that absence, the weight of her legacy remained. The unspoken command of respect, the recognition of sacrifice, and the enduring lesson that courage is not always loud, victory is not always visible, and the true measure of a warrior is carried quietly, in the depth of experience, and in the reverence of those who understand its value. The room, now empty of her presence, held a new energy. Not fear, not intimidation, but understanding, growth, and transformation. The laughter that had greeted her arrival was gone, replaced by reflection, respect, and a commitment to carry forward the lessons she had silently imparted. Phoenix One had left the room, but her call sign echoed indefinitely, a reminder that some names, some legacies, and some lives transcend time, command attention without force, and inspire change in ways that no training manual, physical test, or instructor could ever achieve. And as the trainees filed out, each one felt it deep in their chest. The silent power of history, the weight of earned respect, and the understanding that they had been witness to something extraordinary, something that would shape not just their training, but their lives forever.